All right, so AndofClay are we created. Isabel Allende is our author. Mentioned to you again, it's on page 306. So when you go home, be able to certainly find it within your textbook. There is a newspaper article that comes after the short story. The newspaper article we are going to read later on in the week. The newspaper article is not part of the quiz for tomorrow. So for tomorrow, you're reading the story and going through what's on Edpuzzle. You don't have to worry about the newspaper article at this point, but it will be something that we'll certainly take a look at and reference later on in the week. What do we got? We have a volcano. So we're dealing with a natural disaster that's going on. Tommy, I bet you can guess what happens. You're a year wiser and a year smarter today. I'm hoping. So we have volcanic eruption. Where we're taking place, we'll get into the details here. The problem is it's kind of a domino effect that takes place. We're not going to be dealing with like hot lava and all that stuff burning people alive, but we have a volcanic eruption with snow-capped mountains. So what happens is when you have snow-capped mountains and a volcanic eruption taking place, it is going to melt the snow. Snow starts coming down and creates avalanche. Also, as that stuff continues to come down and gets into warmer climate, now your snow, you're turning into mud, water, all that kind of stuff. So essentially what's happening is due to a volcanic eruption, you end up having mudslides that are destroying entire towns within Colombia. This takes place in 1985. Obviously well before you were born 33 years ago. Mr. Kane was just a little young laddie. A young squirt of 5. Oh, those were the days.
What year was this?
1985. So approximately your death count ends up being, and I'll move it back, 23,000. For us, like in today's world, I think the best similarity, not so far as the events that actually happened, but the end result would be the wildfires in California, where you have entire towns like Paradise, California being destroyed. That's kind of what was essentially happening here. You're in Colombia, you're in the rural area, so this is going to be more villages as opposed to like major urban centers. So the infrastructure is not as strong. They're hard to get access to. You can't just take I-79 or the PA Turnpike to get there and send ambulances. This is much more remote, so it's, airplane drop-offs, helicopters, things of that nature. Colombia doesn't have the financial wherewithal to kind of support all these relief efforts, so you're looking at Red Cross coming in, getting help from and supplies from other countries. So it ends up being a big global news story, but certainly within Colombia would be a pretty tragic thing. And again, I'll zoom back into the words so you can see them, but this would be aerials of what was really happening, where you can see trees and tops of buildings and basically everything is covered in mud. So it is a volcanic eruption is the initial cause. You do have a snow avalanche, but then essentially you have an avalanche or a tidal wave of mud and sludge coming right at you. So you standing, big force of mud coming at you, you're not going to win that battle too often. It's certainly destroying the buildings. So if you're inside a house and the house collapses, that could put you in a pretty bad situation. And then the other thing that's also going on is you literally are having people buried alive in mud. You're standing there, you're getting washed away, and then the mud just keeps coming and coming and coming. So you're like stuck in quicksand where you don't have much of an opportunity. So this is based from that event, but there is certainly going to be some fictional aspects taken. Main character who you're looking at is a guy by the name of Rolf Carley. He's a TV reporter, so he comes to the area to report the disaster for the news. He is not the narrator. Rolf's the main character, but he's not the narrator. The narrator is going to be Rolf's girlfriend. She's basically telling us how he abandons his role as a reporter and tries to help a girl by the name of Azucena. So the main conflict is there's a girl who's trapped. She is pretty much in mud up to about her chest area and is just simply waiting to try to get freed. She's trapped in the sense that there's mud, debris, all those kinds of things would be holding her down. She is also problem is that she's in mud, water up to her chest. The water level continues to rise. So this is based from a real example of Amira Sanchez, who is in a similar predicament, and where she is pretty much stuck holding on to like fallen tree branches and whatnot, trying to support herself as the water continues to rise. What they need is basically a pump to get the water out, but you're in a situation where it's hard to get that kind of machinery and equipment, so it's, what can we do in order to try to ultimately save the girl? So the Rolf, Azucena, those names would all be fictional, but certainly within the context of historical events, pretty accurate depiction of what was going on. All right, need me to zoom in on anything? Any ideas about a title, reason for AndofClay are we created?
It's better than clay. Like rose on clay and ash.
I mean, you pretty much are kind of getting consumed by clay with dirt. You take a look at a lot of various cultures, Native American, some various Native American creation stories, and other cultures would have things where, we come from the earth, Mother Nature. So it is from the earth that we are created. This girl is in a predicament where she's basically kind of being swallowed back up by the earth. So you kind of have this circular kind of life cycle potentially could be taking place if she gets consumed by it. All right. The other thing, keep in mind, not only would you be in a tough situation where you could drown as the water levels keep coming, but chances are you're probably also injured, have some cuts, wounds, things like that. And if you are in mud, in water, things like dysentery, various tetanus, various kinds of, infections and parasites and whatnot could be problematic for you as well. So it's pretty situation to be in. What we're going to be taking a look at for our literary focus, we did situational irony, dramatic irony with the first story. We were taking a look at mood and tone. All of you did a very nice job with answering those questions yesterday, so I was happy about that. This one seems pretty simple, that we're going to be taking a look at the difference between fiction, something being a story, and nonfiction, kind of having a newspaper account in this case. But we're going to look at what would be different characteristics between the two different genres. So one genre being fiction and another genre being nonfiction. The short story is going to kind of take a look at what happens in the events by changing names and places and all that stuff. The newspaper account of the event that comes after the story, that's going to be the more traditional depiction of what happened, where it's going to kind of give you the facts, the figures, the actual details, events that took place. So what we're going to be looking for is characteristically what are differences between fiction and nonfiction writing. This ends up being a pretty significant big deal for us later on in the year when it comes to the Keystone testing, because one day, one module is all fictional passages, the other module, the other day, is all nonfiction. So the better equipped you are at recognizing the differences and what to look for could certainly be pretty helpful. Off the top of your heads, any differences between something being fiction and nonfiction besides real versus make-believe? Any difference in the way that you would write, style, things that you would include, things that you wouldn't include?
There's more statistics in nonfiction than fiction.
Yeah, you're probably more statistics, more facts, more kind of data is going to take place. Conversely, from a writing standpoint, I think you'd have some things that would be in more fictional-based things than nonfiction. Figurative language, similes, metaphors, personification. Not that they can't be in nonfiction, but you're more likely going to see those things showing up in a fictional piece. One of the things that we're also going to look at with it, and kind of tone blends into this, is the whole idea of subjective writing versus objective writing. And so the statistics, data, facts, figures that Adrian was talking about tends to kind of come into this. So this is going to be our big questions to make sure we understand the difference between the two. Subjective writing. Essentially, what you're doing with subjective writing is you're emphasizing your own personal thoughts, feelings, emotions, details about it. So when I read something that is subjective, I'm going to know exactly how you feel about it. There's not going to be, there shouldn't be anyway, any kind of in-betweens. Should you come February time, end of January, beginning of February, what do we do for the next school year? we start to schedule classes.
Oh.
You're making an ugly face. Sorry, I shouldn't say ugly. You're making a unhappy face. It'll be tearful for you because you're going to be juniors. Junior year's miserable, Dylan. I'm sorry. All the classes get harder. The teachers get meaner. You get like jobs with responsibility and stuff. There's no time for naps, Jack. No time for naps. No time for naps. And it'll also be sad because you'll be like, I only have a few months left with Mr. Kane. Unless Nate decides to take CHS argumentation. Shameless plug. Should you take CHS argumentation, you're going to have to come up in front of the room and deliver speeches.
Why?
Because we argue. So today, well, it depends what your speech is upon. So today we had a couple speeches. We had one girl came up and gave a speech about why all citizens 18 and older within the United States, you have to vote. It's not a choice to vote, you must vote. If you don't vote, you will be fined.
Wait. What if you're not in town?
Oh yeah, Nate.
You must vote or you will be fined. There are no ifs, ands, or buts. Now, part of her bill, and yeah, they do what she was mentioning, part of her bill, because this is a formal bill that she's creating, part of her bill was that it would be an extended time to vote. It wouldn't be a one-day thing. So she was going with 3 days that you would have the opportunity, and it would also include a weekend. So it was going to be a Friday, Saturday, Sunday. So most people don't work as much and things like that. So her argument was you had to vote. The other bill that we covered today was within Pennsylvania, everyone would get free health care. You pass a drug test, you get free health care within PA.
That's stupid. Well, what if you don't?
She didn't think so.
No,
Why is that, Kevin? Whose argument is this?
For like a couple days.
The students that we had in argumentation today. For both of those speeches,
Seems to put some fun.
Gavin, Josh, Tommy, for both of those speeches, what they had to do was give their feelings, thoughts, judgments, and opinions. They had to let us know why they think this would be a good idea. Now, there were questions, there were pro speeches, there were con speeches, so if you did not agree with it, you were able to kind of share those thoughts. But their speech was very subjective in that their emotions were coming across. Subjective writing tends to happen more often than not in fiction. So a short story is more likely to be subjective. Emotions come across. Personal essays, speeches, autobiographies. You're going to write a story about your life or a biography about someone else. You tend to explain why you think they are a good person, why they are maybe an evil person or whatnot. Right now, you would have a lot of subjective essays, newspaper articles, speeches being made about former President George H.W. Bush since he just passed away. People are tending to praise him right now, so it's being subjective. Talk about scheduling, getting away from a shameless plug. You might ask people who are older or siblings, what would be good classes for me to take? Did you like this elective? What do you think about this class, this teacher? If you're looking for their personal thoughts, you're looking for subjective tone, subjective detail, subjective data about, not data, but examples as to why this would be a good class, not a good class. So anything that's going to have like personal thoughts, feelings coming across, that's going to be subjective. Yeah. Since we're looking at a short story for AndofClay we created, fiction lets us know that we are most likely going to be having an example of subjective writing. All right. More often than not, newspapers are going to be objective, where you are not getting across opinions. But if you take a look at like the editorial section, where people might debate whether everyone should vote or there should be free healthcare, then that's where you could have some more subjective things kind of coming across. Objective writing is pretty much the opposite. I'm not worried about beliefs, thoughts, or feelings. I'm simply worried about writing that presents only facts and figures. You are being objective. You're not sharing your personal beliefs about it. I'm excited that Mr. Kane is my English teacher. That would be subjective. Mr. Kane is my English teacher.
Subjective.
You're just, no. If you just go, Mr. Kane is my English teacher, assuming you're not going, Mr. Kane is my English teacher, or Mr. Kane is my English teacher. If you simply just state, Mr. Kane is my English teacher, no emotion, connotation going along with it, that's going to be objective. You're just stating a fact.
What if I never showed up?
Then that would be absent.
Oh.
So me going, half kidding, half serious, junior year will be the worst year of your life, would be subjective or objective? Subjective. Emotion, feelings. Junior year is an important year in your life. You could simply say, okay, he's being objective in the sense that SATs, you begin college essays, all that kind of stuff. Think about career, whether college is in the future or not. Find out if your life goal of being an offensive coordinator at a big Division I school is going to happen for Coach Brackman there in the back or not.
How is how is that a objective? Because that's like an opinion. The junior year is the most important year.
It still hints with subjectiveness because I'm getting across that I think it's the most important year. There's not quite as much thought and feeling. If I were to go, instead of me going, junior year is the most important year of your academic career. I don't want to say like your whole entire life. If I were to restate it, and this would be a better way of phrasing it, most guidance counselors or colleges would agree that this is the most important year of your life because these are the grades that they look at to determine your acceptance. This is when you'll be taking most of your fun-loving standardized tests. This is when we get to see what kind of community activities, work, sports, athletic activity things you're involved in. By me going, most would argue that it is the most important year. That would be more objective. You're right. If I go, this is definitely the most important year of your life, that tends to be more subjective with it. So the more dramatic the feelings get, the more subjective it's going to end up being. If you were to go, Lamb to the Slaughter is a short story written by Roald Dahl, objective. You're just giving facts. Lamb to the Slaughter is the best short story I've read in the last 5 years. I think you'll like it too. Now you're getting very subjective with your, emotions, thoughts, feelings, and all that kind of stuff. All right. Objective writing, so journalists who report the news write in an objective style. If you were to, talk about electives, you're going to take journalism at North Hills, you have to make sure more often than not, unless it's an op-ed piece, that you are just pretty much presenting facts, figures of events. Your purpose, if you are going to be doing something that is objective, your main purpose is to inform the reader. It's not to necessarily persuade the reader. So going back to scheduling, if I give you the name just went away from me. What's the big booklet you used to get? Program of Studies. I think it's an online document now. I don't have it in paper. If I were to give you Program of Studies, the little bits of information there would inform you about what classes require. If I were to go around and sit down with you and go, Evan, I think this would be a great class for you. Mia, you should take this class. That's going to be much more subjective. So more often than not, objective writing tends to be nonfiction. Subjective writing is going to be fiction. An example of subjective writing, a genre of subjective writing didn't mention would be things like poetry. If you're into poetry, song lyrics, things like that, that tends to be very emotionally charged, very, very subjectively based. I'll keep it on this page here for a little bit, just to make sure you get all your stuff down. So whereas you had questions about situational and dramatic irony, we're looking ahead here, but you can be pretty safe to bet that objective, subjective writing, what the differences, the nuances between them would be, and being able to pick out examples is going to be something that we're going to be looking at. Best place for objective writing that you would probably run into every day would more often than not probably be your textbooks, especially like a history textbook is going to be very objective, where it's just reporting facts, figures, information that happened. So for AndofClay we created, since we're looking at a piece of fiction, we're going to be looking more so at a subjective depiction of what's going on. she creates a realistic and moving story by combining both elements. She's taking real events that took place, so this catastrophe, natural disaster with the volcanic eruption, but by allowing her to develop characters, manipulate, change setting if she wants, incorporating themes, that allows her to get her ideas across in a much more subjective manner. So she kind of blends these two more so than we would normally have within a story, but ultimately it's going to fall into the genre of fiction, so it's going to be more with trying to get those emotions kind of coming across. But she's able to combine those elements. If you're into like historical settings, you like reading things that happened during World War II or whatnot, that would be kind of similar to this, where that historical fiction, you take things that we know about that happened, but then you allow characters and settings and things like that to be created and potentially manipulated. Nate, you going to take CHS argumentation? Should we pencil you in? You don't think?
Think about it now.
Yeah. You could take AP English Language and Composition with me, because you love the Great Depression in American history, and so over the summer you read The Grapes of Wrath. So it would be a combination of historical events and fictional characters.
Oh, wait, over the summer?
Over the summer. All 621 pages, my friend.
I can't do AP.
I think the appropriate question is, why wouldn't you do that?
My license is summer.
Exactly.
He's skirting on the drive.
Yes, you can take it as you need to be a junior or a senior. It does not, for senior year, it does not count as the English, because it's not a literature-based class. So it would be like taking creative writing elective or language enrichment, something like that. Good news, though. I put in a proposal to order a new book for over the summer. So it's not 621 pages, it's more like 700. So
I knew you.
even better.
It's more like
East of Eden.
I'll still buy
What
it.
about War and Peace? What's up?
War and Peace? Yeah, that's a long one. I've never read War and
How
Peace.
about Moby Dick?
I dislike that book strongly.
Why?
I just never, I had,
About a whale. Are you whaleless?
no, I don't mind about being a whale, but I read it, had to read it in high school. Junior year, it was like the low point of high school English class for me. It really just did nothing for me.
How about Harry Potter?
Harry Potter?
Harry Potter. Very.
I missed the Harry Potter craze. Like when did the first book come out? Like, was it 90s or was it early 2000s? You think it was when? Like I think it came out right when I was in high school, and it just was, yeah. I missed the craze. My mom was all about reading them, but yeah. I read the first one, and that's it.
Lord of the Rings.
Did you see the great movies? Yes.
Did I see the movies?
Yeah, they're pretty good.
I think only the first one.
I'll give the movie.
I think only the first
The
one.
first book came out in 1997.
All right, so I would have been 17. Would have been my junior year, worst year of my life. All right, so when it says as you read the two accounts, what we mean by reading the two accounts, talking about both the story that you're going to have, AndofClay we created, and then the newspaper article that we're going to look at. Again, newspaper article is not part of tomorrow. Tomorrow is only reading the story. But we're going to do a little bit of compare and contrast of the events, the people, the setting, the details, the style, the tone. This is really the part over on this side, detail, style, and tone. That's really where you're going to start to see the difference between something being subjective, something being objective. So we'll do a little bit of a compare contrast, but again, what we're worried for tomorrow is pretty much just going to be you reading the short story itself. So that compare and contrast is something at a little bit of a later time. Thematic. All right, we talk about theme, we mention theme, but we don't always really kind of go into what do we truly mean by theme. For theme, central idea or insight about life in a literature of work. Really, if you're going to try to put it into layman's terms, what is it that the writer wants you to ultimately get from the book is what you're looking for with the theme. Or I shouldn't say the book, but from the text. So how does the author want you to be impacted? How does the author want you to maybe view things differently? What is the universal lesson, moral insight that the person is trying to get across to you? I think a theme for something like The Pedestrian is pretty straightforward for the most part. What would be an insight, a lesson, a moral that Bradbury wants you to know after reading The Pedestrian? Don't get too attached to technology. And you could even say just don't get too attached to anything, you know, like from probably a material standpoint. Don't get too attached to your Harry Potter books, you know, and discount everything else. Don't get too attached to like just material goods, money, whatever the case may be. It could have some pretty horrific consequences that could take place. Story like Lamb to the Slaughter, theme's probably not quite there as much because that's more of like a silly, entertaining argument more so than anything else. But for us, we're going to be taking a look here for theme. Convey important message, reveal their purpose for writing is ultimately what we're trying to find out. Jack, did you steal the iPad card?
Not this time.
Jack did. Do you know who did?
Jack, don't rat me out.
Okay.
I can't believe he picked, like, of all the people in here, he picks you.
Well, was it either that, Nate, or...
You were just going whoever was in your
Yeah.
peripheral vision. Bless you.
Got my neck.
Logan, did you take the iPad card? Okay. Because you have an iPad. Why would you need one? When it comes to themes, things that we're trying to figure out, what you would want to kind of consider, what could be some changes within character? How does conflict get resolved? What could be struggles? Resolving of a conflict. When a conflict gets resolved, that doesn't mean it necessarily happens in a happy ending. And I'm certainly not trying to give anything away within the story, but just generally speaking, it doesn't mean that it has to have a happy ending, but it means that there is at least some kind of finality, some kind of conclusion to it. So a resolution could be, you know, the passing away of a family member. There's a book seniors read Tuesdays with Maury. Maury is a person who's suffering from ALS, and so it's about connection that a journalist has with this person who he meets who's struggling with the disease. Ultimately, Maury ends up dying from ALS, but is able to pass on kind of like some knowledge, some wisdom, some usefulness to the writer. So the conflict is resolved, even though it's not necessarily a happy ending. On Tuesday. Tuesdays. Who's the author? No.
I could see Jack's mom.
Changes within a character. This will certainly be an aspect that we're going to look at. Your main character is Rolf, who we said with the newspaper reporter, the TV reporter. Make sure that we kind of keep an eye on how he has some changes, which is ultimately going to make him to be a dynamic character. But changes within characters, how the conflict kind of gets resolved, finalized, struggles that could reflect a larger problem, which is certainly something that is going to get reinforced within our reading of AndofClay we created. When it comes to overall purpose of writing, and this is kind of more of a general thing as opposed to what would simply be happening within the story, but I certainly still want you to take note of this. You basically have three main purposes that happen with writing. One reason is to inform somebody of something. Second reason would be to persuade. Third one is to entertain. Lamb to the Slaughter, it's meant to entertain. Newspaper account of something, a pre-season preview for Steelers, Pirates, Penguins, it's meant to inform. You certainly could argue that obviously a newspaper editorial is going to try to persuade. People who were coming up, giving up their speeches in argumentation were trying to persuade. But you certainly could have ones where you have combinations of these things happening. So for The Pedestrian, it's a short story. It's meant to entertain, but it also wants you to think about some issues, not become too attached to your technology. So you have entertainment, but you also have persuasion taking place. You could have a newspaper editorial, as mentioned down here, where it could inform the reader about an issue, entertain them with a humorous writing style, but ultimately they're trying to get you to vote for a particular candidate, so that persuasion is going to be there. So inform, entertain, persuade, combination of those things tend to be the purposes that authors are ultimately going to be looking for. Short story, definitely you will have the idea of entertainment. Argument will be, do these things come across as well? By us kind of going through some background notes, we're informing you about the context of a volcanic eruption where you have 23,000 casualties so that you're better understood what is going on within the story itself. Maybe from a thematic standpoint, persuasive elements are going to occur as well. So as you're reading through the story, I don't need you to write this stuff down, but as you're reading through the story, ask yourself two questions, basically why and what. Why is the subject matter of importance to her? What does she want to think about? Why choose a natural disaster or some kind of horrific occurrence like this to base a story around? If it's something that is so horrible, generally we want to try to remove ourselves from that type of situation. Why is it something that she wants to focus on a little bit more? I'm not going to have you write it down, but I do want you to talk about it here. So take one of these two statements. Do you agree or disagree with following statements? People are helpless when a natural disaster hits, so this first idea, or most people would risk their lives to try to save a stranger. I would say second one. Do you think people would be willing to risk their lives? And by saying risk life, I don't want to say it means that you know that you would die, but you know that you would be putting yourself in harm's way, that it would be a possibility. Would you be willing to risk your life for a stranger? So not someone that would accuse you of stealing laptops or iPads in English class, but someone who you've never met before. You're going to throw yourself out there? No, because you have to tell us whether or not you would risk your life to try to save a stranger.
No.
So you're, for some unknown reason, walking down McKnight Road. Because there's, you know, I know. And there is a 3-year-old kid just walking across the lanes. You see traffic coming. You're going to let the kid get smacked.
Okay.
Go, kid! Yeah!
No bathroom for you. Heartless individual.
Yeah, I'd probably like
Hey, it's the parents' fault for letting their kid walk around just
It's like that chicken game.
Why would a
Yeah, it's not my fault that my kid is in the middle of McKnight Road.
You don't have time to think about why, Logan. You got to act.
Yeah, I'm not acting. I'll wait. I'll wait on.
I know how to act. Act like I didn't see him.
What reason would parents let their 3-year-old walk around?
All the more reason for you to come to the rescue.
Yeah, call
and you see a kid walking away. You're not gonna think, oh, what am I gonna
Yeah,
do?
like call CPS, be like, yo, this is my parents. Let their kid walk across McKnight Road.
When next year, 2 years, I pull out of the parking lot, Nate's car is broken down on Rochester Road, I'm gonna go, oh, wouldn't save a kid, not gonna help him out.
Nope.